going to learn about how to convert fractions to decimals into percents and then back again. Let's take a look at this board. On this board, I have two square flat shapes, and I have three little tiny squares, and then I have one long what would be called a rod. Now, this rod is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of these little tiny blocks right here. If one of these squares is one hole, then what I would have here on the board is two holes and this would be 10, 11, 12, 13. So two holes and then 13 blocks. Now, if it takes 10 of these to make one of these long rods, and it takes 10 of these to make one of these blocks, then how many of these small blocks does it take to make one of these large squares? Well, 10 of these small blocks make one of these, so 100 of them would make one of these. So this is 13 out of 100, 2 and 13 hundredths. And this is what it looks like as a fraction. Over here, I have $2, and I have a dime and 3 pennies. Well, how many pennies are in a dollar? There are 100 pennies to make a dollar. How many dimes make a dollar? 10 dimes make a dollar. How many pennies make a dime? Takes 10 pennies to make a dime. So these blocks over here are exactly like money, dollars and pennies and dimes. The dime would be like this rod right here, which is made out of 10 of these tiny blocks. The dime is made out of 10 pennies. It takes 10 pennies to equal a dime. A dollar is like this square block. It takes 100 pennies to make a dollar. It takes 100 blocks to make one of these squares. It takes 10 dimes to make a dollar. It takes 10 of these rods to make a square. Over here, I'm going to write this as a decimal. This is $2.13. $2.13 is equal to 2 and 13 hundredths. These guys are equal. Now let's go over here and look at the percentage. All I have to do to change a decimal into a percent is move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So I have 213%. How can you have 213%? Well, I have 2 whole dollars. Whenever you have a whole, that means that the number's in front of the decimal. Well, we're going to talk about the meaning of percent, but since I have 100% of a dollar twice, then that's 200%, and 3 pennies and a dime is 13% of a dollar. Okay, what is a fraction? A fraction is a part of a whole. The denominator, which is the bottom number, tells how many are in a whole. And your numerator, your top number, tells how many you have. So let's look over here at my farm and my cows. Now my farm is large enough that I could fit 12 cows on it. So it's large enough to fit 12 cows, but I only have 5 cows on my farm. So really the fraction that would represent what's on my farm is 5 cows out of a possible 12 cows. Okay, Now let's go down and look at that as a decimal. What is a decimal? Well, really cool thing about the word decimal is that deci means out of 10. Well, how many numerals do we have in our number system? We have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Those are the numbers that we use to make any number that you could possibly make. That's 10 numbers. Deci means out of 10. So out of those 10 numbers, we are constantly creating all of our numbers. Also, our number system is set up based on tens. We have the ones place, then the tens place, and then 10 times 10 is the hundredths place, and then 10 times 10 times 10 is the thousandths place. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 is the 10,000ths placed, and so on. And on the right side of the decimal, we have tenths, and then hundredths, and then thousandths, and so on. Okay, so our whole number system is based on 10. Decimal is also another way to write a number to show part of a whole. So using an actual decimal point, which would just simply be a dot, we can show part of a whole. Anything to the right of that decimal means it's part of a whole. Anything in front of the decimal means it's a whole. Just like when we were looking at $2.13 earlier, 2 is in front of the decimal. That means 2 whole. I had 2 whole dollars. Okay. Some decimals terminate. That means that some decimals come to an end. Exterminator. What do? They put an end to bugs. They exterminate. They kill them. While a terminating decimal is a decimal that stops. A repeating decimal is a decimal that continues on, and we use something called bar notation to show that. Let me give you an example here. Let's take 5/12 and let's change it into a decimal number real quick. The way that you change a fraction into a decimal is you put the top number in the house, you tip it over and divide it out. Okay, 12 goes into 50 4 times, and that gives us 48. 48 from 50 is 2. 12 goes into 20 1 time, and 1 times 12, 12. 12 goes into 80 6 times, which gives us 72. When I subtract 72 from 80, I get 8, and I would bring down a 0, and I know, because I just sat here and divided it, 12 into 80 goes 6 times. That tells me that this 6 is going to repeat. So I'm going to put bar notation over top of the 6 because it is a repeating 6. Percent. Percent means parts per hundred. Let's talk about the word cent. It's a really simple word. We know what a cent is. And when we're talking about money, a cent is a penny. How many pennies does it take to make a whole dollar? It takes 100 pennies to make a whole dollar, and that's what we've got to think about. And then how many of these little tiny blocks does it take to make one of these big blocks? It takes 100 of those small little cubes to make this big square block. So if I only had 6 pennies, 6 pennies would be 6% of a dollar. If I had 98 of these tiny little blocks, then that would be 98% of a whole. So when you hear cent, think of 100. It means out of 100. Now, let's focus on converting a fraction into a decimal and into a percent. And back again. Let's look at number 1 up here on the board. We have 1 5/7. How am I going to change 1 5/7 into a decimal number? Well, I'm going to take 1 5/7. First of all, I know that 1 means I have 1 whole. It's a whole number. It's not written out as a fraction. So when I write it as a decimal, I'm going to go ahead and put my 1 whole here. And I'm going to put a decimal behind it because whole numbers are always to the left of a decimal. Okay? So 5/7 is all I have to figure out. And I have to figure out how to write that as a decimal number. Well, I'm going to put the top number in the house. I'm going to tip it over and divide it out. 7 goes into 50 7 times. 7 times 7 is 49. I subtract. Get 1 and bring down my 0. 7 into 10 goes once. 1 times 7 is 7. I'm going to subtract. And I'm going to get 0. 7 into 30 goes 4 times. 4 times 7 is 28. I'll subtract. I'm going to end up getting 20 by bringing down my 0. I'm going to stop at this point. I've made it to the thousandths place. And I'm not going to keep going to see if I have a repeating pattern. I'm just going to go ahead and stop at the thousandths place and say 714 thousandths. So I have 1 and 714 thousandths. Now once you get to the thousandths place, I'm going to go ahead and tell you can stop at that point. You don't have to keep going. Some numbers will continue on. And we've talked about rational and irrational numbers. Numbers that continue on without a pattern are irrational. They have no, you can't figure out what's going to come next in those numbers. Rational numbers do have patterns or they end. Now this number may have a pattern, it may repeat, it may end at some point, we don't know. But we're stopping at the thousandths place. 1 and 714 thousandths. Let's go to our percent. What percent is this? Well, to write this decimal as a percent, I'm just going to simply move my decimal 2 places to the right. When I do, my new place for my decimal is going to be between the 1 and the 4. And so I get 171 in front of the decimal, and I just put the percent sign where the decimal would be. So 171%. 171% of is 1 and 5/7. Since we have 1 whole, that's why our percent is over 100. Let's look at number 2. Number 2 is written as the decimal number, 78 hundredths. Well, how would I write that as a fraction? I know that this is out of 100. 78 hundredths means 78 out of 100. So I'm just simply going to write it as 78 out of 100. The bar right here means out of. 78 out of 100. Well, I'm not going to stop there because I know that this can be reduced. Both have a common factor of 2. So 78 can be reduced if I divide it by 2. If I divide this whole fraction by 2 halves, which is a whole, I will simplify this to 39 50ths. And there's my fraction. 78 hundredths is my decimal, and what's my percent going to be? I'm simply going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right, and that's going to give me my percent. So 1, 2, and I'm going to put the percent sign here. 78%. Number 3. Number 3, I have nothing in the fraction spot, nothing in the decimal spot. 45% is in my percent spot. So I've got to change 45% into a decimal and into a fraction. And how do I do that? Well, to change a percent back into a decimal, since I moved the decimal point 2 places to the right to change it into a percent, I'm going to move the decimal point 2 places to the left to change it back into a decimal. So I know that my decimal point would be behind that percentage sign, so I just go 1, 2, and I put my decimal in front of the 4. So I get 45 hundredths for my decimal number, and then I'm going to write that out as a fraction. 45 hundredths is written exactly how it sounds. 45 hundredths. 45 out of 100. I can simplify this. I know that 5 is a common factor of both 45 and 100. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out. 5 goes into 45 9 times. And 5 into 100 goes 20 times. So my simplified fraction is 9/20. Let's go to number 4. In number 4, I have 7/9. 7/9 is a fraction. I want to change that into a decimal number. I happen to know that any number sitting above a 9 is going to repeat. So any single-digit number here that is sitting above a 9 is going to be a repeating number. Now, you can put the top number in the house to prove that. And I get 77 hundredths, and that keeps going. This is called bar notation. I'm putting bar notation over top of that 7 to show that it repeats. All right, and then over here, I'm going to write that as a I'm going to write the decimal form of that number out with the bar notation over top of the 7 that is repeating. And then I'm going to go into the percentage column and move my decimal 2 places to the right, and I have 77%. Okay, number 5. I have 36 hundredths in the decimal column. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move my decimal 2 places to the right, and I'm going to change it into a percent. So after I go 1, 2, I'll put my percent sign at the end of it and just rewrite it. 36%. Now, 36 hundredths, I'm going to write it exactly as it sounds in fraction form. So 36 over 100. That can be simplified if I divide it by 2 halves or 1 whole. I get an equivalent fraction. 36 divided by 2 is 18, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. And looking at 18/50, I can see, oh, they are both even numbers once again, which means they're both divisible by 2. Once again, I can divide it by 2 halves. 18 divided by 2 is 9. 50 divided by 2 is 25. So 9/25 is my simplified fraction. Now, I could have divided the first time by multiplying my 2 factors to give me my greatest common factor. 2 times 2 is 4, and I could have divided 36 hundredths by 4/4 the first time, and that would have given me 9/25. Let's go to number 6, our last one. We have 27% in our percent column. So let's take 27%, and remember our decimal would be behind the percent sign, and we're going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. So we get 0.27, and then it's 27 hundredths. So I'm going to write 27 over 100, and there's my fraction. What are the rules for changing a fraction into a decimal? And a decimal into a percent into a decimal, and a decimal back into a fraction. Let's start with the top 2. Changing a fraction to a decimal. The top number goes in the house. Your dividend goes inside of the house. Your top number is going to be your dividend. So we're going to put that inside the house. And your divisor is your denominator. So your numerator is the top number of a fraction. Your bottom number, denominator, is going to be your divisor. So 5 into 3, well, it doesn't go. So I'm going to add my decimal 1 and add a 0. I'm going to bring my decimal straight up and just kind of ignore it from now on. 5 goes into 30 6 times, and I'm done. 6/10. 6 times 5 is 30. I subtract and get 0. So top number goes into the house, you divide, and then you bring your decimal straight up. The quotient is your decimal. Quotient, remember, is an answer when you divide. When converting a decimal into a percent, you're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. Write a percent sign to the right. So here I am. In the last one, I got 6/10 as my decimal number, and I'm going to move that decimal 2 places to the right. So 6/10, 1, 2. My decimal goes here, and I'm going to put a percent sign where my decimal is. Okay, instead of having 0.6 or 6/10, now I have 60%, which means 60 out of 100. Percent to a decimal. A percent to a decimal. Number one, you just simply move the decimal 2 places to the left. So if I want to change 60% back into a decimal number, well, I remember the decimals behind the percent sign. So I'm simply going to put that decimal back and go 1, 2 places to the left. And that'll give me the original number. So 6/10. Keep in mind, 6/10. In money, that would be 60 cents. 60 cents is 60 out of 100 of a dollar. You have 60 cents out of 100, which is 60%, because percent means out of 100. Decimal to a fraction. Ask, what is the place value of the last digit? Write the number over the place value and simplify. So right here we have 6/10, or I could say 60/100 since I have the 0 here. It doesn't matter, either one. Let's take 60/100. I know a common factor of 60 and 100 is 10. So I'm going to go ahead and divide 60/100 by 10/10. And that gives me 6/10. And then I'm going to take 6/10 because I realize 6 and 10 both have a common factor of 2. And I'm going to divide it by 2/2. And I get 3/5. 3/5 is the simplified fraction. Okay, this is where I need you to pause the video and go ahead and try these out. See if you can't change these fractions into decimals and into percents, and from a percent to a decimal to a fraction. Let's start with the fraction 4/5. 4/5 in the form of a decimal. Again, I can put the top number in the house, and divide by 5. 5 into 40 goes 8 times, and 8 times 5 is 40. I'm done. As a decimal, I get 0.8 or 8/10. As a percent, I'm simply going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. Add a 0 in where there's a blank spot and put my percent sign on the end. I get 80%. Number 2. For our decimal number 2, we have 56/100. 56/100 can be written as a fraction if I just simply put 56 over 100. If I were looking at this decimal in terms of money, that would be 56 cents. 56 cents is 56 pennies out of 100 pennies that makes a whole. So 56 out of 100 is 56 cents out of 100 pennies. Let's take this and simplify it. I can simplify this down a little bit more. I know that 56 and 100 are both even numbers and are both divisible by 2/2. 56 divided by 2 is 28. And 100 divided by 2 is 50. And again, they're both divisible by 2/2. 28 divided by 2 is 14. And 20 divided by 2 is, or 50, excuse me, divided by 2 is 25. So we get 14/25. To change 56/100 into a percent, I'm simply going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2. and add the percent sign where the decimal was moved to. Number 3, there's nothing here in fraction, nothing in decimal, but in percent, I have 76%. So that means I have to change the percentage back into a decimal and a fraction. So 76%. The decimal is going to be behind the percent sign, so I'm simply going to, since I moved the decimal 2 places to the right to change a decimal into a percent, I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the left to change it back to a decimal number from a percent. So I have 76%, and now I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the left. 1, 2. My decimal is going to go in front of the 7. I have 7,600. 7,600 can be written like this. And that is divisible by 2 halves. 76 divided by 2 is 38. 100 divided by 2 is 50. And again, they're both divisible by 2 halves. 38 divided by 2 is 19. And 50 divided by 2 is 25. So I get 19/25. Again, I could have taken the 2 factors that I divided by. If I multiply them, I get 4/4, and I could have divided 7,600 by 4/4 the very first time, and I would have gotten 19/25. Last one, 2 3/7 written as a fraction. Let's write this as a decimal. I know that I have 2 whole, so that means the 2 is in front of the decimal point. And now I have 3/7. Well, what is 3/7 written as a decimal number? Let's find out. Tip it over, divide it out. 7 goes into 30 4 times. Bring your decimal up. 4 times 7 is 28. Subtract and you get 2. 7 into 20 goes 2 times. 2 times 7 is 14. Subtract. Subtract and you get 6. Bring down your 0, you get 60. 7 into 60 goes 8 times. 8 times 7 is 56. And 56 from 60 is 4. Bring down your 0, you get 40. And I'm going to stop right there because, again, I'm at the thousandths place. So you're not going to have to keep going to see if it repeats or continues. Some of them might repeat way down the line, and some of them might do the repetition early, and you might be able to see it. But I'm not going to make you continue. You can stop at the thousandths place. 428,000. So 3/7 turns into 0.428. And it does keep going, but this is where we're stopping. And 2 and 428 thousandths, and I'm going to change that into a percent by simply moving the decimal 2 places to the right. So when I do that, I get 242%. Notice how I left the 8 off, because the decimal point, when I move it 2 places to the right, it stops right in front of that 8. Now, I left the 8 off. There is a such thing as, I could say 242 and 0.8%. I could have continued with it. But most of the time when you see a decimal number, you're going to see it as a whole number. You're not going to see a percent. You're going to see it as a whole number. You're not going to see a decimal point in it. So we go ahead and take that decimal point out and put our percent sign right there where the decimal point would be.